Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and this is going to be a tutorial on how to make sweater pumpkins and sweater pumpkin towers. So these are the items you will need to make your sweater pumpkins and pumpkin towers. I do like to use a cutting mat. It makes it a little bit easier. You will need some sweaters. I like to get mine from the Goodwill or Salvation Army. The nicer the sweater, the nicer the sweater pumpkins look. You will need filler. And if you're going to do quite a few, I suggest getting like the 5 or 10 pound box of the filler because you will need quite a bit. So you'll need a hot glue gun with hot glue sticks, scissors, and a nice embroidery needle. I like to use one that's a little bit longer and a little bit thicker. It helps to keep everything together while you're making the pumpkins. And then you'll also need some felt, some embroidery floss, and also some jute cord. Okay, so the size of your pumpkin is going to be determined by two things: by the length that you cut your sweater sleeves, and then as well as the width of the sweater sleeve. So you want to vary the size of the sweaters that you purchase, and you want to vary where you cut, how long you cut each one before you sew it together. And the smallest I usually ever cut, it would be 5.5, but I find 6 to 7 usually inches makes the best pumpkins. But when you're making the pumpkin towers, you're going to want to have different colors with varying sizes. So you want to make sure that you vary it up on each color of sweater that you select as well. Now the sleeves work really, really well for the smaller pumpkins, but you can also make larger pumpkins with the body of the sweater. You will need to use a sewing machine to sew the sweater into like a sleeve formation, but you know, depending on the sweater, you can just use the barrel of the sweater for one really large pumpkin. But that is how you're going to determine the size. I also have a tendency to cut the smaller portion of the sleeve the shorter length, and then as the sleeve gets wider towards the top on a lot of them, not as much with this one, then I will make the longer pumpkins, you know, maybe even up to 8 inches. So here I went ahead and cut the sleeve at 6 inches, and I prepared my floss. I like to use double with a thick knot so that it does not slip through the sweater. And next we're going to turn the sweater sleeve inside out. So here I have my sweater sleeve inside out, and then I've already started weaving my needle about 1/4 inch into the fabric so that it tucks under when we pull it tight here. And you're just going to sew the whole thing through. Okay, so here I've sewn the hole here, and I'm going to go ahead, and the next step is I'm going to pull this tight. You don't need to make it crazy tight because you are going to run the jute or the yarn up underneath it to make the actual pumpkin look. But you do want it fairly tight. I went ahead and I tied off my floss, and then I have flipped the sweater right side out. And so you can see how the bottom is going to look, and you'll still be able to get the thread through there. The next step is we're going to go ahead and put the filling into the for the pumpkin. So I have my pumpkin filled here. And while you're filling the pumpkin, you want to make sure that you do a good job, because this is going to start forming the shape of your pumpkin. And if you don't have it enough filler, then your pumpkin's going to be really lumpy and possibly lopsided and just not look right in the end. And as you're filling it, you want to kind of push out from the center so that you're really getting it to a nice round shape. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew from the inside, and I always use my seams as a guide for whatever reason, and we're just going to basically stitch up the top like we did the bottom from the inside so that the threads are hidden inside of the pumpkin. Now your thread doesn't have to match your sweater because it is going to be fairly hidden once it's cinched. But I do like to try and choose a color that's close just in case it does show it all. So I've sewn the top of the pumpkin here, and you can see that I have cinched it. Now I am not going to make this super tight yet, and I'm not going to tie it off yet, but it is nice to kind of have it just ready to go and fairly tight, but you are going to place the stem in here, so you can't have it super tight or you'll end up breaking it, have to resew. Okay, to make the stem, we're going to start with our felt, and we're going to add some hot glue and just start to roll this over. and you're going to do it all along there, and then you're going to roll it to the width of stem that you're going to need. So obviously for the smaller pumpkins, a smaller, less thick stem is what you're going to need, and then if you decide to do some really large pumpkins, you would need a very thick stem. My felt rolled up into a little roll, and you see this is going to be a nice size for the little pumpkin that we're making now, and I'm just going to go ahead and then cut this roll off from the rest of the sheet of felt. I'm going to go ahead and cut the length of stem that I feel will be good for this pumpkin, and you know, there's just a couple inches or inch and a half. You just have to use your best judgment. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and stitch our pumpkin, or give it its pumpkin shape. And I decided to go ahead and use yarn for this one instead of the jute, because I do like contrasty colors on my pumpkins, and I thought the jute kind of clashed with this brown. I do like this bamboo spun yarn very much for these. It's very easy to hot glue and maneuver, and it's small enough that it doesn't look bulky. The cotton thread is also okay, or yarn, but it does sometimes have a tendency to break if you pull too hard. So here we're going to go ahead and start. Here I've already put my yarn through the bottom of the pumpkin. This is not always super easy because it is a lot to work through, and so you really have to sometimes pull fairly hard, and the needles are, you know, a little slippery. I do use a few feet of yarn to make sure that I have enough, and I do like to leave this end. You have to leave the end so that you can pull the pumpkin tight while you're trying to make the shape. So here I've gone, so from the bottom up and then back around and through the bottom again to start forming the shape. I do always start with my first thread here along the seam of the sweater, is to hide it a little bit. So we're going to do this a few more times, going you know, back around, down through the bottom and up through the top to make the pumpkin shape. Okay, so now I've made the 5 sections of my pumpkin, and I like to try to make them, you know, as symmetrical as possible, but I like the odd number. The larger the pumpkin, sometimes you have to do one more, but I think I've only done that once. An odd number is obviously better. And so now what you're going to do is you're going to pull your inner string tight enough to where it's tight, but yet you have this room here to stick the stem. And you want to pull your sweater portions out a little bit so that you get that kind of neat looking top where it hides everything and makes it look tidy. Okay, so the next step, you're going to put hot glue in the hole, and then you're going to attach your stem. Now you have not cut off your yarn yet because you're going to use that to make your stem look nice. So as you can see now, I've already started wrapping my yarn around the stem. And I do like to kind of fortify the base and wrap it tight and kind of a little bit thicker, just so that it has some stability. And you can use the hot glue that you already put you know, in the base to the stem, because it can kind of go over and it's a little bit cooler. So now as you wrap the rest of it, I'm not gonna lie, I burned myself numerous times on the hot glue. So if you're really sensitive, you might want to get the very temperate hot glue, or the cooler hot glue, because it's not exactly comfortable. Okay, so here my stem is finished, and we're just going to take and finish off the bottom. You can pull this tight, you can tie it in a knot, and then I like to just do the yarn right here in the center just to make it look nice and finished. Inside the bottom hole, and then I just put my hot glue gun on it to kind of solder it a little bit in there. And then the last thing you do is you just take your stem and you bend it so that you get that kind of classic bent pumpkin stem look, and that is your fall pumpkin. Now, the only difference in making the pumpkin tower is that you only make one stem, obviously. For the pumpkin on the top, you can make these different heights, varying heights, and varying number of pumpkins. And then at the end, you run a string all the way up from the bottom pumpkin through each pumpkin as you add the layer. And you obviously need a little bit more string or jute. And then once you get to the top, then you make your final stem. And it's Just that simple. Thank you for watching my pumpkin tutorial. I hope you have fun making your pumpkins and pumpkin towers. I do make these pretty much every year and they're a lot of fun and just really great to have. So happy fall.